Without further ado, we're going to get into Series 3, Who Could Think It, of the Leadership Academy Breakfast Club. So the Breakfast Clubs are the leadership event series of the Leadership Academy, and they're brought to you by The Wheel, which is Ireland's National Association for Community and Voluntary, Charitable and Social Enterprise in Ireland. And the Academy is placed for leaders in our sector at any and all stages of their leadership journey to take the next steps and connect with other people in the sector. So the event is being recorded, just to let you know. So if you don't want to be included, let us know. And if you do take some pictures, please do tag us. And we do have to say thanks again to Jenny and her team. Amy was also very helpful for hosting us here this morning. They've gone out of their way to be phenomenally easy to work with. So thank you very much for that. And straight to it. So we're here to talk about accountability. So accountability is one of those really interesting concepts where we really want other people to be accountable, but how much accountability do we want to have? We rarely have plans for it, but as a leader, accountability is crucial, both as an individual, but also for your organisation as a whole. So that's what we decided to talk about this morning, and we found two amazing speakers. So on my far left is Pauline McKeown. I'm sure some of you will recognise her. She's the CEO of the Coolmine Therapeutic Community, which is a drug and alcohol treatment centre that brings clients on a journey of recovery. And she's an experienced CEO with a demonstrated history of working in the civic and social organisation. And Dr. Orla Quinn here on my left was the first woman appointed as the Secretary General of the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment. I nearly got it. And she's held leadership positions across several public bodies, and she has extensive experience as a chair and board member at national and international levels. She holds a doctorate in governance and is author of 2 books on public policy. So that's the kind of housekeeping out of the way and into the conversation. So Pauline kicked off this one. So when I met Pauline, she was telling me about Coolmine, and we ended up talking about performance appraisal systems. And Pauline made this really interesting comment about how her and the team in Coolmine had realised that they had to put systems in place for the team that matched with what they expected from their clients and from their service users, and that they wanted the organisation to be held to the same accountability levels as the users, which I thought was really interesting. So Pauline, could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what accountability means to you in Coolmine?
I will indeed. Good morning everyone, and thank you Sharon for the invitation, and Jenny and everyone for hosting. So I've been working in the charity sector for 22 years now, both in London and here in Dublin. I've been Chief Executive of Coolmine for 10 years. And I think that in many ways I've been very lucky, because when I joined the organisation, it was going through a significant period of change. Put simply, there wasn't accountability in the organisation 20 years ago. And we came on a journey of strategic planning in order to bring accountability at all levels in the organisation. And I think where we've arrived to today is a place where there's always room to improve. We've grown from an organisation that had 5 services, 60 staff and a turnover of 3 million 5 years ago, to being an organisation that's 230 staff, has 16 services, and we're now geographically spread. None of that would have been possible without accountability. And the accountability starts with the board. The accountability is held by the senior management team. The accountability is really important for staff, but most importantly for the clients and the people, the vulnerable people that we serve. Our organisation is a very purposeful methodology, the therapeutic community. And there's 3 core values in the therapeutic community approach, and it's honesty, consistency and responsibility. And what that means is that every client who comes into our services has to work really hard to be honest, to have consistency and to take responsibility. And for me, whilst accountability is taking responsibility, it's the outcome. It's following it through, and it's the outcome, and it's to care about that outcome. So for the staff in the organisation, it's really, really important that we brought and put into place systems that hold that accountability. And one of the things that we have very, very much focused on, and I'll go back to where the organisation wasn't accountable and wasn't providing the services, innovating and responding to people's needs, was when the staff had no line management supervision. They were not being supported in the workplace. And we brought those measurements in. We also brought in place clinical supervision as well. And those were transformative because it enabled the staff to be able to do their job. But there's always a quality control element that's required, and that quality control is about improving that baseline, and that's where performance management comes in.
Yeah, we'll definitely touch on performance management as we go on. Dr. Orla, I heard you speak at the Public Affairs Ireland, who are a partner of ours, by the way, at their HR Unconference, and I was struck by some of your own reflections of running departments in, there was 2 crisis points, the recession and then COVID. But you used examples about setting up civil service awards systems. And I thought that's a really interesting way of approaching accountability from a slightly more positive way. So could you tell us a bit about yourself and your own leadership journey and how you view accountability?
Okay. Thanks, Sharon, and good morning, everybody. And I'm delighted to be here. I often think sometimes I'm probably the dinosaur in the room, in that I started in the civil service in a grade that no longer exists, which was a clerical assistant, in a department that no longer exists, which was post and telegraphs, and in a job that no longer exists, which was digitalising the telephone directory, would you believe? So since then, I've had a long journey, and I've worked across a lot of government departments, agencies, and I worked with the European Commission, which actually, again, huge accountability for structural funds in Ireland. So I've touched on accountability throughout my career, and it's always a focus on public service, because that's what I do and that's what we are, and that's to deliver that. So when I was appointed as Secretary General into the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, and I went in, again, first and foremost, the job itself is all about accountability. As a Secretary General, you're accountable to the Minister, to the Public Accounts Committee. I had 14 offices and agencies within my remit, covering trade, corporate enforcement, so every company law came through, both in terms of the legislation we developed, but also in terms of the accountability of business as well, and indeed anybody that is registered on the Company Act. Sanctions for Ukraine. So when I went in, Brexit didn't exist, COVID didn't exist, and obviously Ukraine and the war. So all of that required very flexible responses and very flexible actions to try and help. But if I go back to the job before that, I was head of the Public Sector Reform Unit and Director of Reform in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. And that was immediately after the crash. So coming back to what Sharon said, when we came out of the economic crash, I was shocked to hear colleagues of mine in the Central Bank, in the Department of Finance, who said they would not say in public what they did because they got such abuse for the economic crash. And I actually thought that was really bad for anybody working professionally to be afraid to say what they said. So one of the things we really wanted to do, and I wanted, was to make people proud of what they do. We all do really wonderful jobs. And so to restore pride in the civil service, we set up a whole civil service renewal plan. We did town halls. I had every Secretary General involved. I was an Assistant Secretary General at the time. But part of accountability as well is, I think, we always tend to focus on what's wrong, what's negative, what went wrong, who's to blame. And we rarely ever focus on, actually, what went right, what was fabulous, what did we avoid, and to recognise that success. So one of the areas, and we did a plan with 25 actions, which every Secretary General signed up to, and actually they said to me, not really signing up to it if it's a pair plan from the Public Expenditure Reform, but we'll sign up to it if it's real and if you lead it and it's genuine. And I obviously and genuinely assured everybody it was, and we came a long way. We set up a civil service management board. People tend to think of the civil services we're all the same, but we're not. There's 18 government departments. They're all different. They do different things. They have different cultures. They have different leadership styles. So again, one of the things I wanted to work on was a unified civil service. So what are the things we do in common that we can share and share expertise? So coming out of that was to recognise success. So we set up the awards for the civil service. award ceremony, and we had it in Dublin Castle. And I always remember that because we had a group of private sector leaders that helped us who were going to be the award winners, and they were talking about the prizes. And I remember one guy I was saying, well, what would we give for a prize? Because again, public sector, you don't spend taxpayers' money on stuff that isn't. And one of them had this great idea, we'll give them a go on the government jet wherever they wanted to go. And I thought, Jesus, we are not on the same planet here. But anyway, what we did was, which was fantastic, the prisoners in Mountjoy made awards. And it was absolutely gorgeous awards for people. So that's, I think, from an accountability to recognise the good parts.
Yeah.
Sharon.
So can I ask, I'll go while we have you. So why, at its crux, is accountability so important to an organisation? What is the risk of not having accountability?
Accountability is transparency. It's for everybody to understand what you're doing, how you're doing it, and why you're doing it, and that you're doing it better. That's what I would call accountability. What goes wrong is when things are hidden or when they come out, and we've all seen, lots of scandals and lots of poor management of money and actions. So accountability is actually standing up and saying, this is what I do it to the best of my ability, I can highlight what I do, I can show you, and that's at every single level in an organisation. A leader sets it from the top. They set the standard and demand the standard of accountability, but every single person has a responsibility in an organisation to do that.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop because we need to go back into leadership and the responsibility of it there. Pauline, same question. Why to you is accountability so important, and what do you see as the biggest risk of not being accountable?
I think accountability, for me, put simply, is to really care. You know, it's really to care, to see it through, to take accountability and responsibility for the outcome. Because I think we can take responsibility for actions, but it can stop there. The action, you can complete a task and then there's a full stop, well, that's okay, but the outcome hasn't been achieved. The team haven't achieved the outcome, the organisation hasn't achieved the outcome, the client hasn't achieved their goals. And there's accountability in that, you know. I think that in the workplace and in coal mine where I am, it's just really, really important that, because everyone in the organisation is a leader. Everyone has a role, everyone has a purpose, and everyone has to be accountable. And I think that having that culture set as such, we conducted a culture audit in 2022 on the cusp as we had grown significantly. And one of the things that shored up in there was that 98% of our staff felt psychologically safe in the workplace. So that for me was gold, because it basically spoke to accountability was in the organisation. But moreover, it told me that the 98% of the staff in the organisation had their voice heard. Because at every level in the organisation, from the handover in the morning through to the staff meeting weekly, through to biannual organisational away days, bringing the whole organisation together, the voice of everybody is really, really important. Coal mine does not exist without our staff. Our staff are our organisation. Our staff are the people who deliver the work to very vulnerable people in the East, Midwest and Southwest of Ireland. So they need to be safe in their workplace. Our staff have to be safe. The first thing we offer clients when they come into our services is safety. So we have to know that our staff are safe too. In doing that, they have to be held by policies, structures and processes that allow them to be safe and to conduct themselves in an accountable way.
That issue of psychological safety, I think, is crucial, because what is the difference between accountability and blame? Do you have any thoughts on that, like for how your staff responded in that way? Like, how do we want people to engage in so you mentioned all of the staff are leaders. So how do they know that? How do they know, right, this is the time I need to put my hand up, or this is the time?
Yeah. And two ways. One is that there's a clear vision set. There's a clear vision set in the organisation, and everyone has a role within that vision. and their role is defined. They have targets to meet. They have opportunities to develop, and there is transparency in the organisation. And everybody's a little part or a big part of overseeing that and monitoring that. What I mean, I'll give you an example. So we have staff away days. So we launched a strategic plan, the 6th strategic plan in coal mine last year. There's 52 outcomes. There's lovely objectives, there's lovely actions, but there's 52 outcomes. That's what we talk about on our staff away day. We look at where we've achieved, and we look at also the challenges that we've had, and we celebrate what has been achieved. And then we look to what can we do better. But the implementation of that plan is consistent. Every 6 weeks across the organisation, we have our client representatives, we have our staff representatives from different parts of the organisation. Not management, not the senior management team. It's the clients who receive our service. It's staff across the board.
Yeah, I think part of it though is, as a leader of an organisation, you have to ensure that your staff feel able to act and be protected when they do act. So I tend to talk about the lifeboat approach as well. So an example and the decisions are made in the context of the time. So just think about when the COVID inquiry will start. So I was deeply involved in COVID actions. I came back from Washington on the Friday. I was there with Leo Varadkar into work. On the Sunday, I was telling the vintners we were closing down the pubs. So it was from there on. One of the things, and you will possibly remember, I actually think sometimes we all have a little mental block about it. It was so awful. But one of the things was that we had not got enough PPE equipment in the country, if you remember. So the HSE had very few contacts in China, which is where all that PPE equipment was being made. So we got the IDA involved. We also got a lot of the pharma companies here. Actually, we set up a working group providing PPE equipment. But the big thing was to get it in China, because that's where the scale was. Now, you all know there was flights, and I don't exaggerate, there was planes on the runway in China waiting to take that PPE from every country in the world who are bidding far more money than Ireland could afford. So you will remember some of the PPE came in was of very poor quality, and it's probably still in a warehouse somewhere. Now, really important that those staff understand they did their job. They did a fantastic job. And that, so for example, when I was queried on this at the Public Accounts Committee, I was very clear on we did the right thing, the staff did the right thing, they are protected, they are accountable. But if you look at it when everything is perfect, oh, why did we buy that crap? Absolutely, of course, but we bought it because we had to. So that to me, though, is accountability, that the team that did that know that they are protected.
When we were talking, you also mentioned as well about understanding the realm of the locus of control.
Yes.
And I think you may have mentioned public appointment committees. And what can come up with them, and being asked questions,
absolutely.
yeah, like about
yeah.
like there's no point in asking somebody to hold themselves accountable to something that actually was never. And we do have a bit of a tendency to be like, why did you let that go wrong? And it's but I wasn't.
Yeah.
I had nothing to do with it.
Absolutely, and certainly on a personal basis, and as a Secretary, I'm accountable for everything. My budget went from 1 billion to 2 billion during COVID. And we had, between funding through all the state, the business supports, I had about 5 billion. And I, as I said, 14 offices and agencies. I am accountable for all of that, but don't ask me to know it all, because I simply can't. It's not possible. So if you have, at a Public Account Committee, digging in deep, really important to be able to say, actually, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll find out for you. The worst is to try and keep going. And that's, just finally, that worries me about the future in terms of people, and you mentioned it there, Jenny, people prepared to be on boards, because there's that fear of your things going wrong and your reputational damage. And that's a worry for the future, I think.
And to I love that there has to be a conversation about what we actually expect from people, and it goes into what you were saying about, well, this is the vision, so this is the parameters within. So within your processes that you've designed, how are you finding, or have you found that balance between accountability when something goes wrong or when somebody makes a poor decision, but also accountability, like Orla said, for actually when somebody does really well?
Yeah. Well, I think the crux and the key piece is, as the chief executive of Coal Mine, I don't get it right all the time. You know, there's right now, for example, there's an issue where one of our flagship services from, you know, set up 45 years ago, has been underfunded, you know, for many, many years. And I've pushed that we don't reduce the quantum of service delivery. Because it's really, really important, because it's one of very few supporting women, pregnant women, homeless women, women with children. And I think that, you know, I've held this line where, no, we won't reduce the quantum of service, we'll cut over here. And it's had an impact in the organisation. So, you know, I have to take accountability for that. And I also have to hold myself to the task and the action. Because I feel I've skin in the game. I want to go in and shout and say, how can you possibly reduce the services? How can we possibly anticipate or even contemplate that this would reduce in some way? But the reality is, it may do. And the reality is, for the staff, for the management and the leadership of that service locally, you know, they may take that as they're to blame for this in some way, where it's not. It's beyond their control. So the key and critical piece is to communicate with them and to make sure time is spent where they understand the parameters and what we're doing. There's an escalation strategy. We'll know in January, you know, that there's parameters set and that you're continually communicating back. And I think that's really important. And I'll switch it in then for the individual staff as well. Things go wrong in human service delivery all the time. There's incidents, there's accidents. With the best will in the world, we have a number of crash services. The best will in the world, a child will hurt their finger, you know, it'll be in a door. The things will happen that go wrong. Do we go in and blame the staff that were there? No. Because this is, we have to learn from that. You know, put simply, should there have been an additional safety measure in the on door? You know, that's and if we have that approach at the organisational, at the board level, you know, where the board don't come in and go, oh my God, this is horrendous. They say, oh, tell us more. There's you can do an inquiry as opposed to
but you do have to recognise also though, and take action when things do go wrong and when things deliberately go wrong, and that's important too, and that can be very hard. I always remember when I had pensions policy, and I think it was 85 million pensions paid every year, but Jesus, somebody got onto Joe Duffy and they had a horrendous experience of social protection. If somebody is not performing well on the job, that has to be tackled, and that's a difficult thing. People find that very hard to do that one-on-one, that the person isn't performing well, and we need to recognise that and have that hard conversation. It's not easy, but it has to be done. So I think sometimes when I looked at performance management, and we've also, will I go into the little?
I just want to, because you're calling there accountability if something goes, I'll come back to performance management, but you also said something that we were like, oh, that's controversial. You talked about naming good behaviour, and you said that you have if you want to tell people about that, because I thought that was really interesting.
That's around the awards or the...
No, you said about calling out, that we would send out the email and you would name people in it.
Oh yeah. So when COVID started, because we're such a dispersed organisation, there's nearly 3,000 staff, but within the department 1,000. And everybody went home and we all worked from home and people didn't know what was happening. So every night I used to do an email to people. And after about 3 months, oh my God, you'd be like at 10 o'clock night, have to do the email. But anyway, people really, really did appreciate it, because they knew what was going on. Now, it was always a positive email that we're doing this and we're doing that. I wasn't telling them about the rows I was having over in government buildings or whatever, but it was positive. And then after July, it was every week. I did a weekly email for 2.5 years. And actually, when I finished, they printed all the emails and they gave them to me. And it was just lovely. It was lovely. And I flicked through it. I think, God almighty, look at all we did. It was amazing. I'll come back to that too. But one of the things I did in the email was I named people. So John and Mary did that new scheme for business and they've delivered it, and the team. And sometimes I wouldn't know all the team, but I'd know some of them, and I'd ask the managers, would you ever tell me the names? And some people came back to me and said they didn't like me doing that because they felt the people that were doing the day-to-day stuff, for example, which had to go on, weren't being recognised, and I shouldn't name people. And I thought long and hard about it. And I decided, actually, no, it's important to recognise people for what they're doing. And people moved jobs and came in and worked all the hours, and I never had anybody turn down, you know, that they weren't able for it. And as I say, the budget went through the roof. I never got a clerical officer, but I was now spending 2 billion. And I just thought it was very important. So I went back to those people that raised it with me, and we had a long conversation. And I actually at the end said, I'm sorry, I just don't agree with you. I'm going to keep going. So I called it, and I do think I was right, and I think people did get it and appreciated it in the end. And
yeah, I think personally, I think it's a fair trade-off. If you want me to stand up and say, I've done something wrong, I need help, or I haven't produced, or whatever the case may be, I feel like the good trade-off is actually you did well there. Kudos.
And what I did as well, though, to try and help that was I asked managers to give me a piece of what they were doing, sort of more on the day-to-day, and I pulled that in as well. So just to recognise, and I tried to work right across all the offices and agencies. But when Leo Varadkar finished up after 2.5 years, I said to him, he was finishing up to go back to be Taoiseach, and I said, I'll do you a report card when you're leaving. And I said, let's just reflect on what we've done while he's been minister with us for almost 3 years. And it was 10 pages of, Leo doesn't like long, blurby stuff, so it was 10 pages of bullets. Yeah. And I sent that to all the staff and said, guys, this is amazing. I can't believe we actually did all this in just under 3 years.
I think it's definitely the other side to accountability that in our sector I don't think that we would give as much time to. Yeah. Pauline, how do I know performance management system, you have an excellent system that's all tied in your organisation. Would you be able to tell the room about it?
Yeah, so performance management, there's line management supervision for everyone in the organisation, and I think that's where I'd start. So the performance management happens mid-year and at the end of the year, so 2 performance reviews per year. And the performance management is about, it's not a performance improvement plan because there's an issue, right? The performance management is viewed in Coalmine as where we look at your development, where we look at the areas you're challenged, and where we look at the areas that you've done really well on. So it's not, I think sometimes performance management is just viewed as performance improvement and a problem. It's not. It's part of everyday line management for us in the organisation. And I think the other critical piece is that it is, however, where accountability is held as well. Going back to Orla's point, where there is some staff who, either for personal reasons, for team reasons, or for organisational reasons, it doesn't fit for them. There isn't a fit with the... So in Coalmine, that expansion involved us to pay transferring over staff who were used to a very different way of working. So, they weren't used to the group work, they weren't used to working collectively and together in teams because they'd been low and isolated workers. So that was very challenging for them. So the start point was, well, do you have what you need to do it? What's creating the block for you? And some of them hadn't had group facilitation training. Did they have all the tools? Were they clear on the job now? And then it was looking at the team. Is the team working well? Where are you fitting in the team? And then it would get through to, say, month 3 or 4 where things hadn't changed for the person. And it would be, is this a fit for you? Is it? and it may not be. And that was the hard conversation. Say, well, look, your performance is not at a level. We had a ridiculously high staff turnover rate, as many colleagues in the room would appreciate, across the community and voluntary sector for the last number of years. Delighted to say that this year we're down a good bit. We're down at half. We're down about the 18% staff turnover rate, which is ridiculously high. It's like 1 in 5 staff still. But for us, that's pretty stable compared to where we were. So, but when I looked at the data for the first 6 months of this year and going into a board, I was thinking, okay, well, what's behind that? What's still driving that? And when I delved deeper, 8% was in performance. So 8% of the staff that had left us so far this year, it was performance. They didn't pass performance expectations. And I thought, for me, that was very telling at a time where we feel, and everybody feels, the pinch of a high staff turnover rate, you know. But for me, it was like, well, we're still holding to the standard of service delivery that is expected and required for the vulnerable people that we serve. So, you know, I think that for me was quite telling, you know.
That is a very interesting nuance to turn over. Like, is it better to have a person or the wrong person?
Well, I think potentially having the wrong person can be destructive for the service, can be destructive for the colleagues, and ultimately for the clients that we're serving. And I think something maybe across the community and voluntary sector in particular is where we maybe dropped on our recruitment. You know, we might have dropped down the certification level or the experience level because we were really struggling with recruitment. And so we dropped that down. And I think that we're seeing that now where people maybe aren't, you know, they're not being mentored, they haven't been supported maybe, and they're not passing probation for some of our organisations.
That's incredibly interesting. So can I ask, so we're here from a leadership perspective, so as leaders of an organisation or in a department, how do you model accountability? Like, how do you show that in ways that are tangible for your team so that it becomes your culture?
And I think there's 3 ways when I for my own personal accountability. And I think, again, I'm always going back to systems and processes, but we have a strategic plan, cycle and process, and we go out every 3 years and we ask for that honest feedback from organisations that we work with, from the commissioners of our services, from our funders, and from the clients we serve, and from the family members that we serve. So we ask for their feedback because we want to know. You can't not have honest feedback. Everything shouldn't be right all the time. There's always areas to improve. So it's important, and I have to take that as the leader of the organisation. I have to say, oh, we're perceived as that, this exclusivity, or we're perceived as not meeting the needs for a particular client group, or we're perceived, you know, and it's important to get that feedback and to then assess it, and then to share that with the team and say, what markers have we, what quality control measures have we in to see how we are performing here. So I think it's about always being open to the honest feedback. I think the key piece, and it's something that I've learned, is I guess, look, I'm trained in addiction counselling, so, you know, motivational interviewing. There's specific techniques that we use to elicit information from the clients that we work with, who are often very traumatised by experiences and that. And I think there's certain, there's certain elements of that then I would, you know, carry with me. So it's about openness and transparency. So, you know, even down to my diary is accessible to all my teams. They need to know where I am, you know, with a culture.
I think as well, when we were chatting and I asked Pauline, would she come on, and she said, yes, I'm going to do that because I need a new challenge as a leader. And I thought that is so interesting. And you've mentioned it earlier when you were talking about the PMDS, is that the accountability is the difference between setting a challenge I think you said at one point to me, if everything was easy, you've peaked and you're not doing your like, you should be always trying to do something a little bit harder.
So Sharon had approached me and said, okay, would you come and speak at this event this morning? I was saying, That's a bit out of my comfort zone. I don't know about that. And here I am. But it is about constantly challenging myself. The work that we do in CoMine is constantly, we ask our clients to go on a journey of recovery, one where they have challenges day and daily in their life. Because there's no alcohol, there's no drugs, there's no crutches in some ways, you know. And there's a lot of challenges for them day and daily. For the organisation, there's a lot of challenges day and daily. Our staff aren't well rewarded for the work that they do, you know. Our buildings can be a bit crumbly. We were talking this morning about crumbly buildings, so it's very, very lovely to be here this morning, Jenny. But you know, there's certain challenges, you know.
People find it very hard. You can have all the performance. We put in a new performance management system for the civil service when I was in charge of reform, and there was only really three criteria, three things to ask. And it wasn't about the system that we used, it was actually the conversation. It was to force people to have the conversation. And some people find that very hard. They find it very hard to call out underperformance. And that's through the organisation. So to your question, Sharon, I think it has to come from the top. I used to do a very detailed performance management. Jeepers, the poor organisation was driven demented with just even collecting the data in terms of sick leave and all sorts of indicators. But then ultimately it is about delivering your strategy plan. And well, for me, it was the programme for government in particular. But a bit like what Pauline said, I would share that and I would do a note to say, I've done this, this is what came out, this is what I'm going to concentrate. And remember, performance management is really also about career development, and people need to see that as, this is your opportunity. Somebody said to me once, when do you get 40 minutes to talk about yourself? So this is an opportunity, but people found it very hard. And actually, men in particular, I used to found it very hard to have those conversations. Women were more chatty maybe, and I know that's a really sweeping statement, but so I found if I did it from the very top and did it with all my senior managers, but part of that then was, what are you doing for your team? So it's to escalate, what's the word? Cascade, thank you. Cascade it right through the organisation. It's not perfect, it'll never be perfect, but it's just trying to focus the conversation. And definitely, as you say, Pauline, there are people who don't fit. In the public sector, it can be extraordinarily hard to, sometimes you can move them within the organisation, and because I had such a diversity of roles, actually it worked very well. People found their niche, but sometimes it just doesn't. And then it can be incredibly difficult. It can be incredibly stressful for the manager who's actually trying to manage that person out of the organisation. Do you know, I always think you can have the most awful job, you can have the most difficult technical job, but if you have the right team and the right people, you can do wonders. If you don't, that's what keeps you awake at night. That's
just another, Orla, you've reminded me of a component within ours, and I think that the whole organisation, CoMine, know that I'm performance managed. The chief executive is performance, so I am performance managed. I go through the same system as every staff member in the organisation. And there's an actual subcommittee of the board that look after my performance management, because it needs those lenses, the nomination, evaluation and governance committee, you know, so there's data prepared, like everyone, it's the same process. But I guess for me, just one final piece on that is that, so our client, the work that we do involves each individual client has a care plan. So a holistic care plan. So it talks about their health, their housing, their dreams for the future, their education, training, where they're going to go. So there's a care plan. So our staff have a performance management plan that's about growing, developing, building them. And then the organisation has the strategic plan review group. So it's like each, do you know, so it's like that there's a layer of each, and then the board receive data sets that provide accountability, because everything I do, everything our staff on the ground do, whether it's completing an incident accident form or whatever, that's been fed into a system that's given indicators to the board of how we are on a compliance level. how accountable we are around our performance management, our development of our staff, our training programme, incidents and acts.
Yeah. Thanks. Believe it or not, we're coming up to time. So, yeah, I know 45 minutes, it flies, doesn't it? So, our last question we always give is your best piece of leadership advice for everybody in the room that you either got or you'd give.
Go on,
I think my leadership advice was always about trying to value the person, be kind, be compassionate. I had horrendous managers in the past sometimes, and sometimes you remember the worst ones. So when I used to always meet, and I met everybody that came into the organisation, and when I would meet them either in a group or individually, I used to always say to them, your family comes first, your job comes second. The organisation is big enough and kind enough to help you and protect you when you need it. And I thought that was really important, and people valued that. And I remember somebody saying, people take advantage. They do not. Yeah. And if they do, it's a single individual. They respect it. So I think it's about being kind to each other, and I think that's the leadership. The other thing I would always say is stand up and take the opportunities, because we can be afraid to stand up and say, I'll go for that. So be brave and be kind. Maybe that's it, Sharon, if I could say it like that.
And I think I'd probably, you alone can do it, but you cannot do it alone, right? So there's concepts in my organisation for our clients and the work that we do. And I think that for me was something that was very telling. It's like you can do anything that you want to do, but you can't do it alone. It's about being part of a group and a collective and a community, and and be that your work community, be that your home community, be that your GAA or whatever communities you get involved in through kids and everything. You're a collective, and we're a collective, and therefore we've a collective voice to go. One final is something that we introduced in Co-Mine about 5-6 years ago, was a model for our staff and how they behave, how they act, and it was the servant leadership. And I'm not a fan of serving leadership in terms of what it does and what it represents is we're there to serve, and it connects people to the why. So we've rolled that out across the organisation to all our staff, and it just allows a development piece, and again reinforces the collective, but it's about empathy, compassion, having compassion for everyone.
That's great. Thank you so much, Pauline. What an amazing conversation. I think big hand for the two. Thank you. For those of you who haven't been before, what we do now is it's generally a round table, but everyone actually goes off chatting. So there's more tea and coffee outside, and we'd ask you to stay in the room for the next 40 minutes or so and have a chat about what you've heard, meet some of the speakers, meet each other. If you don't know anyone, don't worry, I'm floating around and there's other people from the wheel. We'll find somebody as we go. And then we'll ask you to come back in about 10 minutes before the end, and we'll take questions for the room on what we've spoken about, if that's okay. So thank you very much. Enjoy the coffee.